Usually, when we think about what it means to be the hero of a story or um, just the guy who saves the day for the people he loves, there's this underlying expectation of action.
Right, like action is everything.
Exactly like the
Mhm.
action movie climax, right?
Yeah.
There's a ticking time bomb, the hero stares at the red wire, and the blue wire, he cuts the red one, and the timer stops at 001.
It's clean. It's totally decisive.
It is so clean. Action equals resolution. But today we're doing a deep dive into a text called The Listening Man, which is inspired by the groundbreaking communication work of Becky Harling.
And it really flips that whole script on its head.
It really does. And I gotta say, this material presents a radical, deeply uncomfortable truth for you, the listener. It argues that your instinct to quote unquote fix things, to cut the wire, to take immediate action that is actually fueling an epidemic.
Yeah, an actual epidemic, which sounds dramatic, but it's just the data.
Right. So we are going to unpack the transformative power of deep listening for men. We're going out into the murky waters to look at the cultural and biological barriers in your way.
And we're going to map out very practical frameworks for listening across 4 crucial roles: as a husband, a father, a friend, and a counselor.
Because the stakes right now, I mean, they are genuinely terrifying.
You really are. We need to start by looking at the reality of male isolation, because we aren't just discussing communication hacks to make your dinner parties run smoother.
Yeah, this isn't just about being polite.
Exactly. We are looking at a literal health crisis. The data from the 2021 Survey Center on American Life is a massive wake-up call. They found that the number of men reporting having 0 close friends has increased 5-fold since 1990.
A fivefold increase. I mean, in just one generation, that is wild.
Yes. Like 30 years ago, if you looked at a statistically average man, he had a robust network, he had multiple close confidants he could call in a crisis.
And today?
Today, the average man is statistically likely to be on an island. I mean, he has colleagues, he has acquaintances, maybe he has guys he plays golf with, but he has absolutely no one he can be deeply emotionally vulnerable with.
So just picture that. You
Yeah.
might be surrounded by people at work, you might have a family in your house, but internally, you are completely alone.
And society's reaction to that is usually pretty unhelpful.
Oh, totally. When society sees men suffering in this kind of silent isolation, the default reaction is usually one of two extremes. Either society says, toughen up, man up, deal with it, or there's the modern progressive flip side, which is you just need to talk more.
Right, like go express your feelings at a drum circle.
Exactly. But the thesis of the listening man goes in a completely different direction. The antidote to this loneliness isn't forcing men to talk more. It is teaching men the deeply underrated, highly learnable skill of silent, grounded presence.
Which is a profound paradigm shift, honestly. To become a listening man, we have to look at why that feels so incredibly unnatural for most of the men listening to this right now.
We have to look at the root causes, right? Starting with childhood conditioning.
Yeah, think about the architecture of a playground, or just how young boys are socialized to connect. They do not sit face to face in a circle and process their anxieties about the 3rd grade.
No, they stand side by side, they build a fort, they play a video game, or they throw a baseball.
Right. The connection is mediated through an external object or a shared task, like hold this board or pass the ball.
And that side-by-side connection serves a vital developmental purpose. I mean, it builds teamwork and spatial problem solving.
It does. But the shadow side is that boys grow up without logging those thousands of hours of practice in sustained face-to-face emotional attention.
So they just don't get the reps.
Exactly. They simply do not practice tolerating someone else's raw distress without immediately trying to change the environment.
And then you add to that the explicit coaching from society, like don't cry, walk it off, boys don't do that.
And you construct this psychological architecture where emotional expression is basically viewed as a systemic failure.
Right, and if your own emotions feel like a failure, or if they feel deeply threatening to your sense of control, then someone else's emotions are going to feel like a 5-alarm fire.
And your immediate instinct is to extinguish that fire, put it out, shut it down.
And we also have to look at the biological layer here because the source material actually acknowledges neurological differences without letting them become an excuse.
Yeah, there is research regarding the corpus callosum, which is the bundle of nerve fibers that connects the left hemisphere of the brain, the logic and analytics side, to the right hemisphere, which processes emotion and intuition.
Like the data bridge.
The data bridge, right?
Right.
And in many female brains, that bridge is incredibly dense. The data travels back and forth between emotion and logic at lightning speed.
Which is sometimes reductively called the spaghetti brain, right?
Yeah, everything touches everything else. Pull one noodle and the whole plate moves.
Right.
But in many male brains, the corpus callosum functions a bit differently, leading to what gets called the waffle brain.
Waffle brain. I love that.
Men tend to compartmentalize.
Yeah.
The logic is in one little square, the emotion is in another. You open a box, you solve the problem inside it, and you close the box.
I have to admit, as reductive as that analogy is, it feels incredibly accurate to how I operate. Like if there's a problem, I want it in a box so I can deal with it. But you said biology isn't an excuse.
It absolutely is not, because of neuroplasticity. I mean, the human brain is not a fixed asset. It is a dynamic organ.
So it can change.
Completely. Every time a man chooses to sit in the discomfort of an emotional conversation without jumping to a logical fix, he is literally firing new neural pathways. He is thickening his own corpus callosum.
So biology is your starting line, not your destiny.
Exactly.
Okay, but let me push back on this fix-it reflex on behalf of the listener, because I feel this deep in my bones. If I see someone I love, my wife, my kid, my best friend, stuck in a deep, dark, emotional hole, my immediate reaction is to grab a ladder and toss it down to them.
And a ladder represents your solution.
Right, the ladder is my solution. Here's how we fix the boss. Here is how we fix the bully here, is the budget spreadsheet. And I equate tossing that ladder with love. I am protecting them. How is throwing a ladder a bad thing?
Well, that is the core misunderstanding of male love. Tossing the ladder isn't inherently evil. The issue is timing and attunement.
Timing.
Yeah, put yourself in the shoes of the person in the dark hole. Tossing a ladder from the top of the hole is a sympathetic action, but it is taken from a safe, clean distance.
You are standing in the sunlight, shouting down into the dark like, climb up here to where I am.
Right, and what the person in distress actually needs before they can ever use a ladder is for someone to climb down into the dirt, sit in the dark next to them and say, I see you. It is freezing and terrifying down here, and you are not alone.
Wow. You have to get in the dirt first.
You have to get in the dirt.
Mm.
Solutions offered without presence are experienced as rejection. The person feels like you are just trying to manage them so you can go back to being comfortable.
That makes so much sense. And the source material brings in a fascinating theological concept here to illustrate the ministry of presence. It looks at the ancient story of Job.
Right, the guy who loses everything, his wealth, his health, his family. It's like the ultimate tragedy.
Utter devastation. And Job's 3 friends show up. They see his agony. They see him sitting in the ashes. And what do?
For 7 days and 7 nights, they sit in the dirt with him. In absolute silence, they weep with him. They do not offer a single piece of advice.
And the text points out that for those 7 days, they are the greatest friends in the history of human literature. They are flawlessly executing the ministry of presence.
7 days of just sitting in the pain? The discipline that must have taken is incredible.
It is. But then the 7 days end. They open their mouths. They start offering solutions. They start trying to logically explain why he is suffering.
Like, well, Job, maybe you sinned. Maybe you need to do X, Y, and Z.
And the absolute second they shift from silent presence to problem solving, they become toxic. They compound his suffering. The lesson here is that before you can ever fix a problem, you must be willing to suffer with the person.
Presence before solution. Okay, so if throwing the ladder is the fix-it reflex, we have to actively suppress that urge. We have to climb down into the hole.
But once we are down there sitting in the dark, what are we actually doing? Because just staring blankly at my wife while she cries isn't going to go over well either.
Right, that's just creepy.
Yeah, it really is. This brings us to the physical and mental mechanics of listening. What is the actual cost of presence?
The cost is enormous, and honestly, we shouldn't sugarcoat it. Genuine listening drains you. It demands your absolute attention, your time, and a willingness to be emotionally moved.
It requires moving from sympathy to empathy, which the sources point out Brené Brown defines really well. Sympathy is looking down at someone and feeling sorry for them. Empathy is feeling with them.
And in our current economy, giving someone your undivided attention is practically an act of cultural rebellion.
Oh, the distraction economy. The text cites that famous Harvard study by Killingsworth and Gilbert. They tracked thousands of people and found that the human mind wanders nearly 50% of the time.
Half of our waking lives.
Right, half of our lives we are mentally time traveling, stressing about the future or replaying the past. We are not in the room. Combine that with the reality that the average person checks their phone 96 times a day.
Your attention is literally the most commodified, fractured resource on the planet.
Swimming against that current requires an intentional mechanical intervention. And the sources recommend a tool so simple it sounds absurd, but it works. The 10-second presence pause.
Walk me through what that actually looks like in practice.
Okay, say you just pulled into your driveway after a brutal day at work. You're about to walk through the front door, Your brain is still looping on an email from your boss.
We've all been there.
Before you touch the doorknob, you stop. You take a deep physiological sigh, 2 inhales, 1 long exhale, and you consciously name what you were setting aside.
You literally say to yourself, I'm leaving the stress of that project in this car.
Yes. I am shifting from output mode to receptive mode. It takes 10 seconds to deliberately change the frequency of your brain before you cross the threshold.
I love the intentionality of that. You are deciding who you were going to be in the next room.
So you've taken the pause, you walk in, someone needs you. Now we deploy the foundational physical framework. The sources break down an acronym used in clinical counseling, SOLER, S-O-L-E-R, and this is all about the body language of safety.
Let's unpack the biology of why this works. So S stands for sit squarely. You position your shoulders parallel to theirs. You are not angled toward the television or the door.
Because that communicates you are the primary focal point of my reality.
Exactly. Then O is for open posture, which is the hardest one for me. I mean, no crossed arms, no holding a throw pillow over your stomach like a shield.
Why is that one so important?
Because crossed arms biologically signal defensiveness to the other person's subconscious. An open posture exposes your vital organs. It is a primal signal of vulnerability and trust.
Wow, that's deep. Then we have L, which is lean slightly forward.
Just a micro movement, right?
Yes, just an inch or two. But leaning in triggers mirror neurons in the speaker's brain. It drops their defensive barriers because it physically signals I am drawn toward your pain, not repelled by it.
Right. And E stands for eye contact, not a predatory, unblinking stare, of course.
Right, it's please blink.
Yeah, please blink. But soft, sustained eye contact. It regulates the vagus nerve in both of you, syncing your nervous systems.
And finally, R, relax, which sounds like an oxymoron if you're trying to do all these physical steps. But if you are sitting there rigidly tapping your heel, checking your Apple Watch, you are leaking impatience.
And the speaker feels like a burden. You have to physically melt into the chair.
So your body is executing so lower, but what is your brain doing? The text outlines 3 levels of listening, and this is where most men realize they've been playing the wrong sport entirely. Level 1 is internal listening.
That's where you are hearing the words, but you are entirely focused on your own experience.
Oh man, this is the trap. Someone says I had a terrible flight, the turbulence was awful, and before they even finish, actually, I'm saying, you think that's bad. Let me tell you about my flight to Chicago in 2019.
Right. You are just waiting for a gap in their audio so you can make yourself the main character again.
Exactly. Level 1 is fundamentally selfish. Level 2 is better. Level 2 is focused listening. You're actually tracking their data. If there is a pop quiz on the facts of their story, you will pass.
But you are still missing the music beneath the lyrics.
Yes.
Huh.
Level 3 is the gold standard global listening. At level 3, you are integrating the words, the tone of voice, the micro-expressions, the heavy sighs, the things they are omitting. You are listening to the entire environment.
And when you achieve level 3, you unlock 2 verbal tools, reflecting and validating. And we need to spend some time here because the distinction the sources draw between reflecting and validating is where a lot of guys hit a brick wall.
Reflecting is pretty straightforward, right? It's just saying, here's what I heard you say.
Right, but validating is a minefield.
Because validating means saying your feelings make sense. And this triggers a massive crisis of integrity for the highly logical man.
Yes. Because what if her feelings are based on a completely false premise? What if my wife says, I'm so angry because you deliberately ignored me at that party, and I know for a fact I didn't ignore her.
Yeah.
I was just trapped in a conversation with her uncle.
Right. If I validate her anger, I feel like I am pleading guilty to a crime I didn't commit. I feel like I'm lying.
This is perhaps the most crucial mindset shift in the entire text. Emotional validation is not logical endorsement. You are not agreeing with their interpretation of the facts.
You are recognizing that human beings have complex emotional realities, and you are acknowledging that their pain is real to them in this moment.
So how do you phrase that without sounding condescending?
You focus on the emotion, not the accusation. You say, I can see why you would feel so isolated and hurt if you felt like I abandoned you at that party. That makes complete sense that you'd be angry.
Notice what you didn't say there. You didn't say you are factually correct, I deliberately ignored you. You said your emotional response to your perception of reality is valid. It diffuses the threat level immediately.
But wait, if I'm doing all this, if I'm leaning in, making eye contact, sitting in the dark hole, absorbing their pain, validating their anger, How do I not just get utterly crushed by the weight of it?
Because you are a human being too.
Right, I get defensive, I get exhausted. If I become this emotional sponge, I'm gonna drown.
And empathy without boundaries is self-destruction. The psychological discipline the text introduces to prevent that is called bracketing.
Bracketing, imagine your own emotional reactions, your defensiveness, your anger, your exhaustion as physical objects.
When you are listening to someone and they say something that spikes your heart rate, bracketing is the conscious internal act of placing your reaction into a mental box, closing the lid, and setting it on a shelf.
But isn't that just a fancy clinical term for repressing my feelings? Because men are already gold medalists at emotional repression. We don't need to practice that.
It's a vital distinction, though. Repression is pretending the emotion doesn't exist and burying it permanently. Bracketing is delayed processing in service of the other person.
So you are internally acknowledging, wow, what she just said made me incredibly defensive. I feel my chest tightening. I see that emotion. But right now, this 10 minutes is about her.
Yes, you put your defensiveness in a bracket, and you will process it later in the shower, or in your journal, or in your own therapy session. You are choosing not to make your reaction the center of the current moment.
It's like an athlete playing through a cramp. You know your calf is screaming, you acknowledge the pain, but you finish the play and then you go to the trainer's table. You don't just collapse on the field and demand everyone stop the game to look at your leg.
Precisely. That's a great way to put it. So physical presence, a soul, and emotional bracketing lay the foundation. You are in the room, you are safe.
Now, how do we draw the other person out? We move from the body language of listening to the verbal tools. We move to the art of the great question.
And questions are the crowbars that open up the conversation.
Yeah.
But the sources are very clear that not all questions are created equal. We have to separate closed data-gathering questions from open exploratory questions.
Right. A closed question demands a finite answer. Yes, no, or a specific piece of data, like, did you have a good day? Did you call the insurance company? Are you mad at me?
I ask those all the time because they feel efficient.
They are efficient for gathering data, but terrible for connection. Closed questions keep you in control of the conversation. You are steering the ship.
Open questions surrender control. They invite the person to explore their own inner landscape. Becky Harling calls these heart-opening questions.
And the examples in the text are so disarmingly simple. The master key isn't even a question, it's an imperative. Tell me more about that.
When someone gives you a superficial summary of their day, saying, tell me more about that, as an invitation to drop the mask.
Yeah.
Or what was the hardest part of that interaction for you?
That cuts right past the chronological facts and goes straight to the emotional core.
And my personal favorite for when someone is processing a failure or a disappointment is, what do you wish had happened differently? It gives them permission to grieve their unmet expectations.
But here is the catch, and it is where most men fail. Once you ask that beautiful, open-ended question, you have to tolerate the void. You have to shut up.
The 3-second rule. The absolute agony of conversational silence.
Why do we hate it so much? We treat silence in a conversation the way broadcasters treat dead air on the radio. It feels like a catastrophic failure.
Right. If we ask a deep question and the person doesn't answer in 2 seconds, we panic. We rephrase the question, we offer a joke, we answer it for them. Like, what was the hardest part? Was it the boss? I bet it was the boss.
Why do we do that? Why is a 3-second pause so physically uncomfortable?
Because silence demands intimacy. It forces us to just sit in the unvarnished reality of the other person. But extended silence is actually a profound gift.
When you ask a deep question and simply wait, you are communicating. I am not rushing you. I am a safe container. I will hold this space until you figure out what you actually want to say.
You are giving them the runway they need to take off. But for that runway to work, the environment has to be safe. And emotional safety, according to the text, relies on 3 pillars: confidentiality, non-judgment, and emotional regulation.
Let's focus on that last one, emotional regulation, because the sources provide an example that hit me right between the eyes.
The toxic coworker example.
Yes. Imagine a wife comes home. She is exhausted, near tears, and she tells her husband about a deeply abusive, humiliating interaction she just had with her boss.
And the husband loves his wife fiercely. So he gets furious on her behalf. He stands up, he starts pacing the kitchen, his voice gets loud.
He's like, that guy is a monster. You need to go to HR tomorrow. I should drive down there and talk to him myself.
From the husband's internal perspective,
Yeah.
He is being a champion. He is showing absolute loyalty. But let's look at the actual physics of what just happened in that room. By allowing his own anger to explode, he has hijacked the emotional space.
He has made his anger the largest object in the room. The spotlight violently swiveled away from her and onto him.
Exactly. And now the wife who came home needing a safe place to fall apart suddenly realizes the room is no longer safe. She now has to manage his emotions. She has to talk him off the ledge.
"Oh, no, don't go down there. It's not that bad. I'll handle it." He has completely destroyed the sanctuary she needed to process her own feelings.
I have fallen into that trap so many times.
Yeah.
You think you are being William Wallace defending your partner, but you are actually being an emotional bulldozer. Regulating your own outrage so the speaker remains the center of gravity is incredibly difficult.
Which is exactly why this is a discipline. So we've built the foundation. Solar open questions, bracketing the power of silence, emotional regulation. Now the text takes us into the crucible.
We're going to take this toolkit and pressure test it in the most high-stakes, relentless daily relationship a man has, listening as a husband.
The marital landscape. This is where the habits are the most entrenched. And the source material anchors this section in Gary Chapman's 5 Love Languages research.
Because we often think of love languages as acts of service or physical touch or gifts. But the data reveals a deeper current. For wives who report high levels of marital satisfaction, feeling heard is almost universally cited as the core component of feeling loved.
If she does not feel heard, the gifts and the acts of service feel like bribes. But to truly hear a spouse who you have known for years, you have to develop the ability to listen beneath the surface.
Because couples rarely argue about the actual thing they are arguing about, right?
Right. Give me an example of listening beneath the surface.
A classic scenario. A wife looks at her husband and says, "You never help around the house." Now, the husband's waffle brain hears a literal, factual accusation. He immediately opens his mental spreadsheet and audits his recent behavior.
That is factually incorrect. I mowed the lawn on Saturday, I took out the recycling last night, and I fixed the sink.
Boom. Logic deployed, argument destroyed, I win.
And the marriage loses. Because he engaged entirely with the superficial words and completely missed the emotional transmission. Beneath the surface, you never help is almost never about the chore chart.
It is an encoded distress signal that means I feel incredibly overwhelmed by the mental load of this family, and I feel like I'm carrying it alone.
So if the husband is using level 3 listening, he brackets his defensiveness about the recycling, and he addresses the distress signal. He says, "It sounds like you are carrying a massive amount of weight right now and feeling completely unsupported. I'm so sorry. Tell me what that feels like."
It completely disarms the conflict. You aren't conceding a factual argument about chores. You are meeting her in her emotional reality.
To build this specific muscle, the sources lean heavily on the research of John and Julie Gottman. They recommend a daily practice called the Stress-Reducing Daily Debrief.
This sounds like a corporate meeting, but it's actually brilliant. It's 20 to 30 minutes every single day, and there are strict rules. You each take turns talking about your world outside the marriage, work, friends, traffic, whatever.
And the listener is forbidden from offering solutions. No advice, no playing devil's advocate. You just listen, reflect, and validate.
The Gottmans found this single practice is one of the highest predictors of long-term marital success. It creates a daily ritual of emotional deposit.
But we have to address what happens when the conflict is inside the marriage. When she isn't mad at her boss, she is mad at you. Because that is when a man's cognitive ability to listen literally short circuits.
This was the most validating part of the research for me, honestly. When my wife and I get into a deep conflict, I feel like my brain just shuts off. I get tunnel vision. I can't process her words. I thought I was just fundamentally broken.
You are not broken. You are experiencing a documented physiological state that the Gottmans call flooding. During intense marital conflict, men's bodies react differently than women's.
A man's heart rate will often spike well above 100 beats per minute. Cortisol and adrenaline surge into the bloodstream. You are thrust into acute fight-or-flight mode.
And biologically, when you are in fight or flight, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for empathy, nuance, and rational listening, goes dark. Blood is diverted to your extremities so you can fight a tiger or run away.
So you are biologically incapable of level 3 listening.
Completely incapable. And when a man is flooded, he resorts to what the Gottmans call the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse for a relationship. These are the 4 communication styles that guarantee divorce if left unchecked: criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling.
Let's look at how those are actually failures of listening.
Mm-hmm.
Criticism is attacking her character like you are so selfish, instead of addressing a specific behavior.
Defensiveness is refusing to listen to any feedback and playing the victim.
Stonewalling is when the man just completely shuts down, crosses his arms, stares at the floor, and withdraws from the interaction entirely.
And then there is contempt, which is the most toxic of the four. Eye-rolling, mocking, name-calling. It comes from a place of assumed moral superiority. It is the absolute antithesis of the open, vulnerable posture of Solar.
So if you feel yourself getting flooded, heart-racing tunnel vision, the horseman settling up, what do? The text says you have to call a timeout.
But I want to make this crystal clear, because I used to do timeouts entirely wrong. A timeout is not just throwing your hands up, shouting, "I can't deal with this," walking out of the room and slamming the door.
That is not a timeout. That is emotional abandonment. It spikes your partner's anxiety even higher because they don't know if or when you're coming back.
A clinical timeout requires an explicit contract. You have to say, "I am getting flooded right now. My heart is racing. I need to take 20 minutes to calm my nervous system down so I can actually hear what you're trying to say."
I am going for a walk, but I promise I will be back in 20 minutes to finish this conversation.
You explicitly state the commitment to return. You are taking a break to regulate, not to escape. And what do you do during those 20 minutes? You don't sit in the garage nursing your grievances and planning your counterattack.
You breathe. You lower your heart rate.
And when you return, the text suggests utilizing the speaker-listener technique to get the conversation back on the rails. It is highly structured. Only one person speaks at a time, using I statements to describe their feelings.
The other person is not allowed to rebut or argue. They can only reflect back what they heard until the speaker says yes. That's exactly what I mean. Then and only then do you switch roles.
I'll be honest, if you try this in your living room, it feels incredibly artificial. It feels like you are in kindergarten passing a talking stick back and forth. It is clunky and awkward.
It feels artificial because it is an unnatural intervention.
But you know what else feels clunky and painful? Physical therapy after you blow out your knee. You are doing these ridiculous tiny movements with a rubber band. It hurts, it's slow, it feels stupid.
But you do it because the natural mechanics of your knee are broken, and you have to force the structure until the muscle heals.
The speaker-listener technique is physical therapy for a broken communication dynamic. You have to endure the clunkiness to rehabilitate the trust.
That is a brilliant analogy. You are breaking the toxic muscle memory of interrupting and cross-complaining.
Yeah.
But here is the thing that should keep every parent awake at night. If you are doing the flooding, the stonewalling, the interrupting dance with your spouse who is watching, the kids, you are literally wiring their brains for communication in real time, which forces us to look at the vertical relationship. Listening as a father. This is where listening shapes neurological and spiritual development for the next generation.
The research on the impact of a listening father is breathtaking. Children who grow up with fathers who are emotionally present, attuned listeners show dramatically lower rates of anxiety and clinical depression.
They have higher academic achievement, they develop greater empathy for their peers, and they form secure attachment styles that dictate how they will love their own spouses decades later.
A listening father is not just a, quote, nice guy. He is actively installing a psychological immune system in his children. But the mechanism of listening changes drastically depending on the developmental stage of the child.
The sources break this down beautifully, starting with toddlers ages 2 to 7.
You can't exactly sit a 4-year-old down and say, "Tell me more about your emotional landscape."
No. For a toddler, listening is floor play. It is whole body listening. You physically get down on the rug with them. And the key is you let the child direct the narrative of the play.
If they are building a chaotic, structurally unsound Lego tower, your fix-it reflex will scream at you to intervene and show them the right way to build it. You have to bracket that.
You just enter their world on their terms. It
Yeah.
communicates, your world is fascinating to me and I want to be invited into it.
Then they hit the tween years, ages 8 to 12. The psychological shift here is profound. This stage is all about the child navigating their growing social ecosystem.
To an adult, a fight over who got to sit at the cool lunch table seems utterly trivial.
Right, the instinct is to say, "Buddy, who cares?
Yeah.
That doesn't matter in the real world. Wait till you have a mortgage."
But to a 10-year-old, the lunch table is the real world. That social ecosystem is their entire reality. If a father dismisses that drama as trivial, he is teaching the child that their emotional reality is invalid.
The listening father affirms their growing competence and takes their social pain seriously without taking over and calling the other kids parents.
And then we enter the crucible. Adolescence. Teenagers.
The hardest stage of all for a listening man. The core developmental task of a teenager is individuation. They have to pull away from you to figure out who they are. They become prickly, secretive, argumentative.
But paradoxically, at the exact same time they are pushing you away, they are terrified of losing your approval. They desperately want to be known.
Becky Harling has an analogy in the source material that completely reframed how I view parenting teenagers. It's the heart door. Imagine your teenager's inner life is a room with a heavy wooden door.
You are standing in the hallway. You cannot force the door open.
Yes.
If you kick it down with your parental authority, like demanding they talk to you going through their phone without cause, you destroy the trust forever. The room is no longer safe.
But you also can't just walk away and leave them alone in the house. The listening father pulls up a chair and sits safely in the hallway right outside the door. He makes his presence known. I'm right here. I'm reading my book, but I'm here.
And eventually, when the teenager finally cracks the knob open an inch, you do not rush the door. You gently invite them out.
And practically, teenagers rarely crack the door by walking up to you and saying, "Father, I am experiencing existential dread." They communicate in code. They communicate through behavior.
Sudden irritability, a dramatic drop in grades, withdrawing into their bedroom for hours, extreme clinginess out of nowhere. These are not just bad behaviors to be punished, they are encoded distress signals.
The listening father becomes a behavioral detective. Instead of attacking the behavior, he uses gentle, curious probing. He knocks softly on the door.
Hey, I've noticed you've been spending a lot of time in your room lately, and you seem a bit on edge. I'm not going to force you to talk, but I want you to know I'm right here whenever you want to.
And then there's the concept of the test question. This blew my mind because I guarantee I have failed this test dozens of times.
Teenagers will often dip a toe in the water with a very casual offhand comment to see if you are a safe container. They will be riding in the passenger seat of the car, staring at their phone, and they'll mumble. Yeah, Jake was saying some really weird stuff about pills at practice today.
That right there. The temperature in the car just changed. They're testing you. If your fix-it reflex kicks in, if you slam on the brakes, freak out, start lecturing them about drugs, or grab your phone to call the coach, you fail the test.
A heavy wooden door slams shut and locks. The teenager thinks, okay, Dad cannot handle my reality. It is not safe to bring the heavy stuff to him.
But if you pass the test, if you take a breath, keep your eyes on the road, regulate your own terror, and simply say, wow, tell me more about that.
Then they realize the hallway is safe. They can open the door all the way. But I want to pause here because I know we have older men listening to this deep dive right now. Men whose kids are 25, 30, maybe 40 years old.
Yes, the guys who are listening to this and feeling a crushing weight of regret. The men who are realizing, I spent the last 20 years in fix-it mode. I kicked down the door. I dismissed the lunch table drama. I failed the test questions. I damaged the relationship. Is it too late for them?
The source material is incredibly beautiful and full of grace on this specific point. It is never too late. Adult children almost universally carry a buried, enduring longing for a genuine connection with their fathers.
The repair starts with humility. A father who goes to his adult child and offers a completely uncaveated apology.
I have been reading something, and I realize I was not present for you in the way you needed growing up. I was always trying to fix things instead of just hearing you, and I'm so deeply sorry. I want to learn how to listen to you now.
No buts. No, I was just trying to provide, just owning the failure.
Exactly. That kind of profound humility can spark generational repair. The human heart is remarkably resilient when it finally experiences the safety of being truly heard.
That gives me a lot of hope. So we've covered the ecosystem inside the house. The lateral relationship of marriage, the vertical relationship of parenting. Now we need to step outside the front door.
We are going to circle back to that terrifying statistic we opened with the male loneliness epidemic and apply our toolkit to the men we stand side by side with. Section 6, Revising the Brother Code. Listening as a friend.
The Brother Code is a fascinating sociological phenomenon because it contains both deep beauty and a very dark shadow. The beauty of male friendship is the absolute loyalty of action.
It's the guys who show up with 3 pickup trucks at 6 a.m. in the freezing rain because you need to move a couch.
Yeah.
It is practical, shoulder-to-shoulder, action-oriented love.
It's the best part of being a guy. My car breaks down at 2 a.m. I know exactly which 3 guys I'm calling, and they will be there with jumper cables, no questions asked.
We all rely on that. But the shadow side of the Brother Code is that it implicitly and sometimes explicitly forbids emotional vulnerability.
The unwritten rules of the pack are, You do not complain. You do not talk about your deep internal fears unless you are at a funeral or you've had 4 beers, and above all, you are never ever perceived as needy.
The irony is so thick you could cut it with a knife.
Yeah.
Because all the psychological research indicates that underneath that stoic exterior, almost all men are secretly desperate for their friendships to be deeper.
They are carrying massive burdens, failing marriages, secret addictions, crushing financial stress, and they want to talk about it. But they are absolutely terrified of being the guy who brings down the vibe or loses status in the hierarchy.
It is a massive game of emotional chicken. Everyone is suffering. Everyone wants to talk, but no one wants to flinch first. The text argues that the man who has done the work we've been talking about has to be the one to break the code.
He has to model vulnerability to create a permission structure for the rest of the group. He has to go first.
You literally have to be the guy sitting around the fire pit who takes a breath and says, guys, I need to be honest. I have been really struggling with my anxiety lately, and my marriage is in a really dark place.
Yes. And if you have ever been in a group of men, when one guy finally takes that risk, the atmospheric shift is palpable. There is a collective exhale.
Suddenly, the space is safe. You have given everyone else permission to drop the armor. But the critical moment is what happens in the 5 seconds after a friend takes that risk.
When a buddy looks at you and admits he is drowning, your response dictates the entire future of that friendship. The sources reference C.S. Lewis here to talk about the ministry of showing up.
When Lewis's wife, Joy David Hetman, died, he wrote extensively about his grief. And one of the most agonizing parts of his experience was seeing his close friends literally cross the street to avoid him.
They didn't avoid him because they didn't care. They avoided him because they were terrified they wouldn't know the right thing to say to fix his grief.
Avoidance is devastating to the sufferer. The most important thing you can do for a friend in agony is to physically bridge the gap. Your physical presence communicates, I have absolutely no idea how to fix this, but I am not going to let you be alone in the wreckage.
And to keep you from saying the wrong thing, the text provides a great list of toxic responses to avoid. The worst offender is a concept they call premature Easter.
This is such a profound framework. In the Christian narrative, you have the trauma of the crucifixion on Friday,
Yeah.
the absolute dark silence of the tomb on Saturday, and the triumph of the resurrection on Easter Sunday.
Premature Easter is when a well-meaning friend cannot tolerate the dark silence of Saturday, so they try to rush the suffering person straight to Sunday.
They want to skip the tomb because the tomb makes them uncomfortable.
Exactly. So they say things like, well, God has a master plan, or everything happens for a reason, or you'll look back on this and see how it made you stronger.
Which is just intellectualizing their pain so you don't have to feel it. It's offering silver linings. Like, at least you have your health. At least you can find a better job. It completely invalidates the agonizing reality of the moment they're currently surviving.
The discipline of the listening friend is to sit in the ashes of Saturday. You honor the pain. You don't try to paint it gold. You just look them in the eye and say, this is a nightmare. I am so deeply sorry. I am right here.
If we extrapolate this, we can contrast the isolated, hyper-individualized, modern male experience with the ancient model described in the book of Galatians. Carry each other's burdens. True brotherhood is a structural agreement to distribute the crushing weight of human suffering across the community. You are load-bearing walls for each other.
Distributing the weight. Okay, that brings us to Section 7, the trusted advisor, because here is the inevitable consequence of everything we've talked about.
When you actually put this into practice, when you use the solary, when you ask open questions, when you sit in the ashes, without offering a premature Easter, people notice. You become a beacon.
You become known as a safe, deep listener. And suddenly you find yourself elevated into the role of a mentor, a counselor, the wise elder. How does a man handle that responsibility?
The default instinct for many men when placed in a mentoring role is to adopt a lecture model. They think I have accumulated wisdom, and my job is to download my wisdom into your brain via a monologue.
But the text advocates for a totally different approach, a Socratic and Christ-like mentoring model. Meaning you lead with questions, not answers.
Precisely. If you look at the historical accounts of Jesus, he rarely answered a direct question with a direct answer. He almost always responded with a counter question that forced the person to examine their own hidden motives.
The goal of a trusted advisor is not to hand the person a map of your wisdom. It is to ask the right questions so they uncover their own wisdom. Human psychology dictates that people are infinitely more committed to a path of change if they believe they discovered it themselves.
To facilitate that discovery, the sources outline the 3 stages of counsel. Stage 1 is exploration. And the rule here is you have to stay in this stage much, much longer than feels natural.
You are just exploring the geography of their problem. Like, tell me more about that. How long has this been happening? What does that feel like?
You are resisting the urge to jump to the fix. Stage 2 is reflection. You reflect back the core themes you are hearing and you ask them what they think the next right step is. Like, it sounds like you were feeling completely disrespected at work. What do you think your options are?
And then finally, stage 3 is input. But there are caveats. You only offer your direct advice if they explicitly ask for it, and only after you have thoroughly exhausted stages 1 and 2.
When you listen with that kind of restraint and reverence, you create what the Celtic Christian tradition calls thin places. These are sacred spaces where the veil between heaven and earth feels porous, where profound psychological and spiritual healing occurs simply because a human being is having their story held with absolute dignity.
And a vital component of this pastoral listening is what we call the long tail of care. This is so important. The long tail of care is the discipline of showing up months after the initial crisis.
When someone loses a spouse, everyone is there for the first 2 weeks with casseroles and text messages. But by month 3, the casseroles stop. Everyone else has moved on.
The listening man is the guy who puts an alert in his phone to take the widower out for coffee on the 3-month anniversary of the death. Because that is when the shock wears off and the true hollow reality of the grief sets in.
But I have to ask a boundary question here.
Yeah.
I can see the danger in becoming this incredibly empathetic safe harbor. If I become the guy who creates thin places for everyone, won't everyone just trauma dump on me?
When I develop a massive savior complex, how do I ensure I don't accidentally become a bootleg unlicensed therapist for my entire neighborhood?
That is a critical ethical boundary line. A listening mentor is a bridge, not a destination. You must have the humility to know your absolute limits.
You cannot out-listen severe clinical trauma, active addiction, or deep psychiatric disorders. Your job is to hold them safely in the immediate moment and then actively help refer them to professional clinical care.
You say, I love you too much to try and fix this on my own. I'm going to walk with you, but we're going to get someone who is equipped to help us navigate this.
Knowing when to hand off the baton, which perfectly transitions us into our final and undeniably most intense section of this deep dive. When the world falls apart. Crisis listening. This is the moment when the toolkit isn't just about building deeper connections, it is about literally saving a human life.
We need to define what a crisis is. A crisis is any event where a person's normal, everyday coping mechanisms are completely overwhelmed and shattered.
This can be sudden, a horrific car accident, a sudden death, a violent assault. Or it can be developmental, the slow, grinding accumulation of stress that finally results in a psychological snap, like a prolonged divorce or bankruptcy.
Regardless of the type, the sources give us a framework to operate in those chaotic moments, the ABCs of crisis listening.
A is for approach. Your primary job is to establish contact and create a perimeter of physical and emotional safety. You must be the calmest nervous system in the room. You do not match their panic.
B is for breathe. Before you try to logically process the trauma, you have to regulate their biology. Get them a glass of water, have them sit down, walk them through deep breathing. A brain flooded with adrenaline cannot process verbal logic.
And C is for connect. Emotional solidarity before problem solving. You look them in the eye and say, I am right here, you are safe now, and you are not alone.
But the text places a massive warning sign over how male crisis specifically presents itself. Because men don't always fall apart in the ways society expects them to.
This is the phenomenon of masked depression. Society expects depression or a crisis to look like weeping, staying in bed all day, and expressing depth sadness. But men are socially conditioned to view sadness as weakness.
So the depression wears a mask. In men, a severe crisis often looks like sudden explosive aggression. It looks like extreme irritability over minor inconveniences.
It looks like a guy suddenly working 80 hours a week to avoid going home. It looks like escalating substance abuse or engaging in incredibly reckless behavior. It's a performance of normalcy that is cracking at the seams.
And the mortar holding that toxic performance together is shame. The text identifies shame as the ultimate, impenetrable barrier to male disclosure.
The cultural contract says a man must be competent, self-reliant, and in control. To admit that he is falling apart, that he is terrified, feels like a fundamental revocation of his man card. It feels like death.
Which is exactly why when a man in crisis finally hits his breaking point and opens up to you, you must ruthlessly suppress your fix-it reflex. He did not endure all that shame to come to you because he lacks a strategic plan.
He came to you because the psychological weight of carrying the lie alone is physically crushing him. Sitting in the dark with him is the ultimate act of brotherhood.
But we must address what to do when the crisis reaches the absolute extreme, suicidal ideation. The text busts one of the most pervasive, dangerous myths in our culture. The idea that asking someone if they are thinking about suicide will somehow plant the idea in their head.
This is so important. People are terrified to say the word suicide because they think it's a trigger.
The clinical research is unequivocal on this. Asking directly does not increase the risk. In fact, it almost universally decreases it, because if they are thinking about it, they are already carrying the terrifying weight of that secret.
When you ask directly, are you having thoughts of ending your life? You are communicating. I see the absolute depths of your pain, and I am strong enough to talk about it with you.
But my instinct, and I think the instinct of almost anyone listening, if a friend looks at me and says, I just have no reason to live anymore, my immediate desperate reaction is to start listing all the reasons they do have.
I want to say, what are you talking about? Look at your beautiful kids. You have a great career. People love you. You have so much to live for.
It is the most natural human instinct in the world because you are terrified of losing them. But clinically, it is the wrong move. When you start listing reasons for them to live, you are accidentally arguing with their pain.
You are telling them that their current agonizing reality is incorrect. You are invalidating the darkness they are trapped in.
So what is the alternative? What do you actually say?
You validate the unbearable weight of the pain without validating the solution of suicide. You look them in the eye and say, I cannot imagine how incredibly heavy and exhausting it must be to feel like that. I am so deeply glad you told me. And I want you to know I am not going anywhere. We are going to get through this next minute together.
You anchor them to the present moment, and then you become the bridge to professional help immediately. You do not leave them alone. You call the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline if you are in the U.S. or Canada. You drive them to the ER. You use your presence to escort them to safety.
That is the highest calling of the listening man. You stand in the gap when they cannot stand themselves.
Wow. Okay, let's pull the lens all the way back and look at the entire journey we've just taken. We started on the playground, looking at how boys are conditioned to avoid eye contact. We waded through the daily trenches of marriage, unpacking the biology of flooding.
We looked at the hallway outside the teenager's door, and we went into the deep, dark waters of brotherhood and crisis intervention. If there is one overarching truth to take away from this deep dive into the listening man, it is this deep listening is not a passive, weak, or secondary skill.
Not in the slightest.
Yeah.
It is a wildly active, physically demanding, emotionally courageous discipline. It is the tool that de-escalates conflict, rewires broken marriages, builds psychological resilience in children, cures the epidemic of male loneliness, and quite literally saves lives.
And the beauty of this is that it does not require perfection. It requires practice. You are going to mess this up. Tomorrow you're going to get flooded and raise your voice. You're going to throw a ladder down a hole instead of climbing it. You're going to use a closed question when you desperately needed an open one.
But the goal is intention. So here's your challenge for this week. Pick one person, your wife, your teenager, your best friend. Give them 10 minutes of 100% undivided, non-fixing, level 3 presence.
Put the phone in another room. Lean forward. Ask an open question and sit in the silence, just once. Watch what happens to the atmosphere in the room.
And as we close, the source material leaves us with a profound reflection on the ultimate trajectory of our lives. It's a reflection on legacy. At the end of a man's life, when the noise of the career and the bank accounts and the accomplishments fades away, his legacy will not be his resume. It will not be the grand speeches he gave or the brilliant logical solutions he engineered.
It will be the quiet moments where he chose absolute presence. The people standing around his bed at the end won't remember the exact advice he gave. They will remember how incredibly safe they felt when they brought him their broken pieces. Which brings us all the way back to that action movie metaphor at the start. You don't have to be the guy who cuts the red wire with 1 second left to be the hero.
No. Sometimes the truest form of heroism is just sitting down in the dirt next to the ticking clock, looking the person in the eye and saying, I have no idea how to fix this, but I'm right here with you.
What if the most powerful, transformative thing you will ever say to the people you love is nothing at all?
That is a profound question to leave with.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.